I have been in exactly one fist fight in my entire life, and it happened at church camp, of all places. Now, I don't want to give the impression that I was part of some Christian fight club. I don't even know what that would look like. Ooh, I'm taking you down. I'm taking you down like St. Francis took the gospel down to Egypt. Oh yeah? St. Francis is a sissy. It's all downhill from here. Maybe they fight lions or something, I don't know. Point is, I would totally watch that, but no, not only did I go to just a regular church camp, it was a Methodist church camp, which is the most boring thing in all of Christendom. I don't know if any of you went to a religious-themed summer camp of some sort, but I think mine was pretty generic. It was a week-long sleep-away camp in the forests of Pennsylvania. I went for 3 or 4 years, starting around the age of 9. And in my experience, there were 3 types of kids who went to church camp. The first are who you might call the true believers. These are kids who would use words like blessed and salvation, but never words like jerkface or boobies. They were just really into Jesus that way. But the second group was more middle of the road. These were kids, maybe they went to church sometimes. It was just more likely that their parents saw the $100 camp fee as a bargain way to get a kid out of the house for a week. And I was somewhere in between those first 2 groups. But the third group were who the rest of us called the bad kids. Now, the bad kids were actual juvenile delinquents. And they used much worse words than jerkface. But the church sent them to the camp as part of a charitable mission. But the camp, they just put all 3 groups together, and they put us in these army barracks-style cabins, boys and girls separate, of course. And here's how a church camp day would go. You'd wake up, eat breakfast, then learn about God. And you'd go for a hike, do some arts and crafts, lunchtime, and learn about Jesus. Then you'd do a club activity for an hour, go for a swim, dinner time, learn more about Jesus, and say your prayers and go to bed. You do that for 5 days straight, have a crappy talent show, and Saturday morning you pack up and go home. It's all just structured, which I guess is par for the course for organized religion, but the only real free will that you had was in choosing that afternoon club activity. And for that you had a bunch of options. You could go with athletic, with soccer or volleyball. You could do arts and crafts with, say, macrame, which I learned is decorative knot tying. You could go for nature walks, or you could choose the nerdiest option possible and be on the camp newspaper. I was on the camp newspaper. And you may ask yourself, does a church camp really need a free press? And the answer to that is a definitive no. But we took it seriously. The camp paper, I mean, it was a daily broadside, churned out on an old mimeograph machine, the real deal, it seemed to us, and we cut reporters. I mean, we broke big scoops, such as tonight for dinner, Salisbury steak, with hard-hitting follow-ups like tomorrow for lunch, Mexican pizza. It's really good. But my main beat on the camp paper was to do the cabin cleanliness grades, one of those deals where each cabin is judged and the neatest and cleanest gets a prize. Now, to be clear, the actual judging and prizes were all done by the camp counselors. But my job on the paper was to do an independent evaluation, because democracy dies in darkness, people. So I was doing my afternoon inspection rounds one day, and I just finished my own cabin, Willow Lodge, solid marks, B+. And I went through the screen door to the adjacent Spruce Lodge. And I just started, I don't know, checking the crispness of Spruce's bed making when I noticed about halfway down the cabin, there was a kid sitting on his bunk. He was a bad kid. He really should have been at macrame or whatever. And the bad kid, he noticed me too, and he gets up, he says, "You can't be in here." Now, I knew that my totally imaginary press credentials could take me anywhere in the camp except the girls' cabins unchaperoned. And so in my head, I was all, "Cool your heels, mister. I'm with the newspaper, and I'm gonna blow this story wide open." But in reality, what I said was closer to, "No, it's okay, I'm with the paper." But this bad kid, he had like a Trumpian respect for real journalism. And he came over and got all up in my face and says, again, "You can't be in here. Get out." No, I'm really allowed to be here. "Get out." This time with a shove. And then another shove. And he kept on pushing me until I had retreated all the way out a side door and my back was up against the wall of the shower block. And since the pushing and shoving had taken me as far as they could go, I guess the bad kid decided to graduate to more advanced assault and battery. And this is where he took both hands, grabbed me by the throat, and started to squeeze, like for real. So there I was, with my back against the wall, standing on my tippy toes trying to get as much air as possible, when I was confronted with the question, what would Jesus do? Now, I'm no theologian, but like most things, it seems the Bible's a bit unclear on this point. I mean, if we're going to play the greatest hits, you gotta go with turn the other cheek, right? But the thing is, he had me by the throat, and I've only got one of those, so it's kind of a literal interpretation. But on the other end of the spectrum is something that's always fascinated me, even as a kid. It's the story of Jesus and the money changers, where Jesus sees the usurers and the moneylenders doing business in the Holy Temple. And according to some biblical scholars, he went rip shit crazy on them. But you know, like in a holy way, I guess. And so to my 10-year-old mind, being slowly deprived of oxygen, I had a whole range of options. I could go with Jesus of the Beatitudes, all the way to Jesus with kind of an attitude. And I went more or less with option B and just started punching wildly at the bad kid's midsection, just whee! But you know, like in a holy way. And miraculously, that worked, and I was able to get the bad kid off of me for long enough to start what has to be really the saddest in an already low bar of church camp fistfights. It was mostly just circling around with some intermittent, awkward swings. I don't think a single punch landed for either of us. And sure, there was some more shoving and even a brief headlock at one point, but neither of us was doing any real damage. Still, it felt like a long time, probably because it was so boring, but it was maybe just a minute or so before a camp counselor ran over and broke us up, and thus ended my one and only honest-to-God fist fight. And I'm sure there are a bunch of reasons why I've never had a second, but one thing I can say is it's not because I was racked with guilt about the first. I remember being real worried I was going to get in big trouble, but there were literally no repercussions whatsoever. So no, I think the real church camp lesson was not that fighting is a sin and you shouldn't do it. It was that I kind of sucked at fighting and I looked stupid doing it. So never again. Thank you, Jesus.